What's up, everybody? This is LaMont Ferrell, and you're watching the TV Writer Podcast.
Hosted by Gray Jones, the TV Writer Podcast is brought to you by Script Magazine and ScriptMag.com, the leading source for script writing information in print and on the web. My name's Gray Jones, and I want to welcome you to the TV Writer Podcast, partner of Script Magazine. Well, today we have an interview with writer, producer, director, actor, and comedian LaMont Ferrell. You're going to love his interview, and he's got a lot of great tips. And also he talks about some things that are different than the prevailing wisdom, and I'll just tease you with that. You're going to love the interview. Before we get to the interview, I do want to mention a few resources. Of course, you can go to tvwriterpodcast.com. There's lots of helpful resources there, like hundreds of free TV scripts, pilots, Bibles, and all that kind of stuff. Links on the sidebar. And as well, there's a database of TV writers on Twitter with over 960 writers and continues to climb. And of course, there's over 65 episodes of the podcast with lots of great interviews. I should mention that they're not time sensitive. You can go all the way back to episode 1 and find out about writers. Just because they were a couple of years ago doesn't mean that they're not very helpful. So do check that out, tvwriterpodcast.com. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter. @GrayJones is my handle. You can find my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Graham A. Jones. I mentioned before that there's a 70-minute playlist on my YouTube channel with interviews with John Truby. You got to check those out. Very, very cool interviews, especially for breaking in. And as well, you can find me on IMDb, imdb.me/GrayJones. There's a Facebook group, facebook.com/TVWriterPodcast. And I do want to urge you as well, this is the holiday season of giving. At tvwriterpodcast.com, click on the support tab. And if you'd like to give a little tip to the podcast, I'd really appreciate it. 65 episodes, each one takes about 10 hours. That's over 650 hours of work to get these podcasts to you. And so I'd appreciate it if you are grateful for these podcasts, then please give a donation. Even a few bucks would help, and it would go a long way in helping me bring these to you. So anyway, on to my interview with LaMont Ferrell. You're going to love it. Let's roll. This is Gray, and I'm here with LaMont Ferrell. How you doing, Lamont?
I'm wonderful, Gray. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And you are a writer, producer, director, actor. You wear a lot of hats.
I wear a lot of hats. I'm also a juggler, a street musician. I do it all. Cater, whatever happens to be done. But no, yeah, I'm a writer and a producer, but I'm also an actor as well. I kind of got in this business as a stand-up comedian. So I always used to being in front of the stage. As I became a writer, I started writing for TV and film and so on and so forth. I just quite naturally continued to act. So that's what I do.
Very, very cool. Now, you grew up in Philadelphia. Tell me about, did you start doing stand-up right away, or when did you decide that you wanted to get into that?
That's a pretty interesting story. I grew up in Philadelphia, actually outside in the suburbs of a small town called Yaden, Pennsylvania, which is right outside the Philadelphia city limits. Mm-hmm. And I attended Temple University on a basketball scholarship. I played basketball. Thought I was going to be in the NBA as a youth growing up. So, but I became a pretty good basketball player, and then I was an All-American in high school. So, and I received a basketball scholarship. But there, a lot of guys on the team, we would go to a lot of contests on campus for open mic nights, and they would have meetings, and they would have singers and jugglers or what have you. And, the first prize was like $100. So we would always go and critique all the acts. And I was the one that always would say that guy would have won if he had said this, or if he had talked about that, to get the crowd, a little more into it. Mm-hmm. And there they said, hey man, why don't you go? Why don't you try to do it since you think you know everything? And I was like, hey, I'll try. And so that's how I got started. I did my little first open mic, and I actually didn't win, but I came in second place to actually a singing group, Jeanne, and they became pretty famous and signed with Motown and had a whole bunch of records out. Mm-hmm. And one of the students said, hey, you're pretty funny. How long you been doing comedy? I said, this is my first night. And she said, well, you should go down to the Funny Bone, which was a local comedy club, and she happened to be a waitress there. And I never in my life thought about doing stand-up comedy. Didn't really know too much about comedy clubs, never been to one. But make a long story short, that's what I did. I went down there and I saw the whole open mic, and I got the open mic bug, and that was my first kind of taste of entertainment. And I was writing my material, and that's where I met a lot of the Martin Lawrences of the world, and David Allen Greer's and Dave Chappelle's, who would come to Philly to perform, and I would open up for them as the host. And those guys were like, "Hey man, you're pretty funny. If you want to do this for real, you need to move to New York or LA and really make this happen," because Philly was such a small market for TV and film and entertainment business in general. And I was going to move to New York, but it was about 2 hours away from Philly. It was too close to mom's home cooking. So I knew I would be home every weekend, So I said, if I moved to LA, I had to do it. I had to make it. And that's what I did. So I got in my car and I drove across country, and, kind of rest is history.
Very, very cool. And you won some stuff. The Comic Relief Comedy Festival, you won that festival, funniest new comic. And tell me about maybe some of the successes around that time and how that led into writing for television.
Yeah, I moved to LA strictly trying to do stand-up, get on stage, get stage time. And, like everybody else, following the dream in Hollywood, La La Land. And so the Comic Relief contest, they had Whoopi Goldberg and a host of other well-known comics, usually host that for years. And they had a portion where they had a contest for new comedians. And so I entered that contest, and I actually won, that contest. I know some other comics at that time, like Dane Cook and others who were in that contest that were, like myself, just starting out. And from there, started getting a little, buzz. I had a couple auditions for some pilots and different things. And actually, ironically, Brian Callen, who was on Mad TV at the time, he was in Hangover and a couple movies. I ran into him yesterday, and he remembered my set from that, which was like 17 years. Really crazy. Like yesterday, literally, he was like, "Dude, I remember that OJ joke that you did." And I was like, "Wow," So people take your material for a comedian. That's great when you can leave people with something. They can walk away from it and can remember your material. So. But from there, I went to a taping of Martin Lawrence's sitcom, and that's when I saw that set, man. I saw those directors' chairs. I saw those writers. I didn't know what they were doing, but I knew I wanted to be down there instead of up here in the stands. At the end of the taping, it was a script laying on the ground. I asked one of the writers, "Hey, man, can I have that?" And they were like, "Hey, whatever. The show's over." They didn't care. They handed me the script. And it was like the holy grail, man. When I got that in my hand, it was like the Covenant, like the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was like, And I just said, this is it, because I majored in journalism at Temple. I minored in advertising. I always wanted to write like funny commercials, like Super Bowl commercials. So I always was kind of funny, and so there I was like, I could take my comedy and my writing and put it all together. And I went home and just kind of put together a little spec on my computer and tried to figure it out. I didn't really have the format, and that's how I kind of got started.
Very, very cool. And since then, you've been in quite a bit of stuff. I mean, Moesha and Parenthood, and Nothing But a Woman, and whole pile of stuff. Tell me about when you started in the room. What was that like?
Yeah, my first opportunity as a writer, I was waiting tables in Los Angeles at Red Lobster, And a good friend of mine, Ed Evans, was writing for Living Single at the time, the Queen Latifah show. And he said that BET was doing a kind of a small, which today would be considered kind of a webisode, but back then it was no web series, so not even the internet, basically. So they were doing kind of 3-minute little sitcoms that they would place in between their existing shows to kind of jumpstart to see if they want to take it to series. And they had a show called Nothing But a Woman, starring Laura Hayes. She was a stand-up comedian at the time. So anyway, I just I faxed in what I thought the format of the show. They wanted 10 pages of a sample of the show. They kind of gave you the log line. And that's what I did. I got hired along with 10 other writers. And after 2 weeks, they fired everybody except myself and another gentleman, Norman Vance Jr., who actually became my writing partner.
Wow.
We stayed, and it was kind of a bittersweet because I was, all my friends, writers I met, my first writing job got fired, but I was glad that I still had a job, but we stayed and basically wrote all the episodes for no more money, but it really gave us the opportunity, really creatively, to just kind of just go out and just write anything and everything. And they really didn't kind of shackle us on what we came up with. So it's only 2 writers. So we had to crank the scripts out. And so, they were just waiting for a deadline for a script to come in. We would write another one. And that really I think, honed my writing skills and comedy and creative skills. And from there, just started taking off. We got an agent. We had a one-man show that was sent to the HBO Aspen Comedy Festival. And then I got picked up to write for The Parenthood. And then we got write for Moesha and then Girlfriends. And, then I've been just writing and producing shows ever since.
Wow. Very, very cool stuff. And so at some point you decided, I want to get my own show off the ground. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, as a writer, you're just thankful that you're doing what you love to do. You're creating shows, you're writing episodes, you're creating characters, and you meet people on the street that really like your show, and they're like, "Oh my God, you write for Girlfriends? I love that show. That's my favorite show." And they come up with all these shows, and you're like, "Oh, I created that episode. That was my episode. I pitched that story."
Wow.
And so, but during that time, you're really writing for someone else. You're writing for that creator of that show. And after 3 or 4 or 5 years in writing, you start thinking, I have ideas. I think my shows could be as successful as some of the shows I've written for. And then you start watching TV differently. And then you're looking at a lot of sitcoms and some successful ones, and some that aren't so successful. And you're like, I think I know what I'm doing now, and I need to come up with some ideas. And so that's when we started pitching ideas, our own shows, and I pitched, and fortunately, opportunity to sell a few shows over the years, and haven't had one hit the screen, the airways yet, but that's my goal now. Is I'm right now in my career, I'm pitching and creating pilots.
Mm-hmm. And you've had some produced though, right? That just haven't gone to series.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I've sold the shows to UPN, the WB. I sold a show a couple of years ago to TBS here in Atlanta, and kind of comes back to my athletic and basketball career. It was actually a show called Big Shot, and it was about a high school basketball player that gets drafted to the NBA, but because he's he's a teenager, his parents make him live at home. So you can just imagine a teenage millionaire living at home with his parents. Be almost like the Cosby Show. If Theo, had a lot of money, he bought a $30,000 watch. Like how would Bill Cosby do that? So that was kind of the stories, and I still think it's a good show. So right now I'm still in negotiations with that show. So hopefully that'll end up on air sometime in the not too far future.
Very, very cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about the style of work you do. First of all, I was really interested by the fact that you are a clean comic. And now, are you still doing any stand-up? Is that still something you're doing?
Yeah, I still do stand-up. As a writer, as an actor and a stand-up, it's a little more difficult because when you're in series, you can't really go on auditions and things during the day because you're on set on the show. And as a stand-up, you just can't leave and go out of town on the road because it's like a regular 9-to-5 job. You have to be at work the next morning, which is fine. When I'm not on a series or we're in hiatus, and I try to get back on stage and as much as I can. So yeah, I still do stand-up, and I definitely plan on doing it even more in 2013.
And so tell me about being a clean stand-up. I noticed that in your bio. What does that mean? And I mean, I imagine that a lot of comics would rely on the unclean to punch up their jokes. How are you able to do that and still be a successful stand-up comic?
Graham, I grew up in a household with 5 brothers, 6 boys, no girls. So comedy was always. My father's hilarious. Like a lot of comedians, you get it from your family, and so. My parents, they never used profanity. They never cussed. I never heard it growing up in my house. And so I remember my first time I performed on stage, I wanted my parents to come see me perform, which they did. And they left right after I got off stage because the comedian after me started cussing. But, starting out, I don't you really use profanity. So it was just quite natural for me to tell stories, kind of like similar like a Bill Cosby type style. He's from Philly. He went to Temple. We're both alumni. I've actually had an opportunity to meet him. I didn't really hone my career after him, but it was quite natural. That's who I kind of gravitated to, listening to growing up. And I like Richard Pryor. He cusses, but he's a phenomenal actor. So I have nothing against comedians who use profanity. If I'm telling a story and that character, for example, is like a Mike Tyson, and he comes out, and I remember old Vander Holyfield thing. He had a whole rant about him using profanity. So if I'm telling a story, if I'm doing a character and it needs profanity in it, then I'll use it to get the point across from that character. But just doing stand-up comedy and just on stage, yeah, I don't use any profanity just because I don't really think it's necessary, and I think I have a broader appeal and that opportunity without it, because I know as a comedian and as an entrepreneur, because I put on comedy shows, there's a lot of people who don't want to hear that, and so they'll ask me when I say, "Hey, well, is it clean? Can I come? Can I bring my kids? Can I bring my wife? If not, that's fine." So, something I've done and something I will continue to do.
Mm-hmm. And it mentions in your bio that observational skills are a big part of that. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I just have a knack for, which I think a lot of comedians when I see a lot of things, I could try to take kind of like a Jerry Seinfeld. He was a comedian of mine I really liked and admired. I was a big fan of Seinfeld. You take the small things, in life, small little things that some people might not think is funny, but then you take that and you're like, you know what, that is hilarious, right there. Like, that guy locked his keys in his car, and that's not funny when you hear that, but it's funny when you see a person and you think about when you lock your keys in your car. And the keys are in the car, but you still kind of pat around or you still find the keys, and then you go and you pull on the door again, like you saw all of a sudden you grant huge superhuman strength. Like, it's locked. Like, why are you still
Yeah.
So little things like that throughout my life that just growing up, man, that I said, and I think that helps out with my writing as well as a sitcom writer, because when I'm in a room and it's a big part of it is pitching. So when you're in a room and that shows, I'm kind of looked to as the kind of the joke guy, the funny guy that's going to come up with a funny pitch or a funny story. And so, everybody pitches out ideas and stories. I try to go the back door. Everybody goes to the front door. I'll try to come to the back door and figure out a way. How can I can say the same story but make it different? How can I tell that story differently? And to give you a quick example, here in Atlanta, they have a Chick-fil-A franchise. I don't know if you're familiar with that,
yeah.
But it's sandwich store. And I went in there and they had on the door, it said Father-Daughter Day. I had no idea what that was, but I figured, the fathers would bring their daughter in on Wednesday nights and just bond with their kids. Mm-hmm. But I took that and put it in the back of my head because I said that was just unique to me. Like, I never really seen that on TV, and I knew I could use it at some point. And years later, I had an opportunity to write for Are We There Yet?, the series on the TBS. And I pitched this episode about a father on the series, Terry Crews, who takes his daughter out on a date, like a father-daughter day, but I flipped it, instead of going to Chick-fil-A, he wanted to take her out to a restaurant, so to teach her how to go out on a date when she starts dating, to show her how to properly she should be treated on a date,
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and it worked. They actually brought that episode, and I wrote it, and Michael Strahan, the football player, actually played one of the bouncers. They ended up actually going to a teen nightclub. That happened. So yeah, you just never know where your stories will come from. And so that's kind of how I come up with a lot of things.
Very cool. So tell me a little bit more about that in the sense of, for people to learn this, what kind of things should they be doing? Is that something like, would you carry a notebook and write that down, or you just kind of file it away in your brain, and what kind of things should people be watching for?
That's a great question. But I actually started teaching a writing class here in Atlanta. And that's one of the subjects that we talk about. Yeah, I recommend carrying a pad around, leaving a pad next to your bed at night, because you'll wake up with stories or ideas. Or nowadays with technology, you just text yourself, Text. Mm-hmm. I text myself all the time with ideas that come up, or a lot of phones now, an iPhone, you can leave messages or record yourself. Because what happens is, at least I do, you'll forget. Or you'll remember part of it, And quite honest with you, ideas, they're worth a lot of money. I mean, ideas could be $1 million idea, quite truly. If you're in your car and you're like, oh my God, that'd be a great idea for a movie, or that's a great idea for an episode. And if you just kind of file it away, and then you'll get home and you'll say, man, what was that? I thought about, and they'll go out of one ear and out the other, and you'll just forget it. And the next thing you know, you'll see that on a movie or on a TV show. And you're like, I thought about that 2 years ago. So that's what I do. So yeah, I recommend to people, especially new writers or even, current writers and successful working writers, is to have some type of device to write your ideas down, to have your ideas stored away. And a lot of times what I'll do, I'll come up with movie ideas or log lines, or pilot ideas, and I'll just file them away, and I'll have a list. And then sometimes you'll have a meeting, and they'll say, you know what, we're looking for a movie about skateboarders, or something. You're like, what? I thought about a good skateboard. I go home, look at my notes, and there it is, a skateboard idea that I thought of a year and a half ago. That I saw at a park, and some kids were talking, and you twist it, and you kind of format it for the show that you're trying to pitch it to, or the studio, and nothing, you could be writing a movie for a studio off of something that you just sit in the park and overhead from a bunch of 13-year-old skateboarders.
Very cool. So one of the things that you talked about a little bit, I'd like to expand on, is particularly with the comedy, but I think even just looking at your bio, you mentioned the idea of being an entrepreneur, and I hear that a lot from writers today. Of course, there's the Louis C.K. example where he did his own show and marketed it on the internet. But I think even just career-wise, there's a lot more of this entrepreneurship that's needed. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm a proponent of that. My family was in the restaurant business growing up, so I work with my dad and my 5 brothers. So I'm used to kind of starting your own thing and creating your own path. So for me as a writer, I'm fortunate enough to have an agent out in L.A., but I never was one to just kind of sit home and wait, by the phone for my literary agent to call me, or, I have a theatrical agent. I'm part of SAG as well as the WGA. So I never was one just to sit around and wait, because I just know, for one, I'm not the only agent, the only client they represent. For one, I'm realistic about that. I know that I'm not the only person they're thinking about. And 2, there's just too many opportunities out there, and I could create opportunities. And I'm a firm believer of creating your own opportunity. So if I'm coming up with an idea for a series or a movie, or primarily a series, years ago you could almost pitch it and kind of go in and sell it. And you can still do that today, but if you don't have a track record of having a bunch of shows on television, it's very difficult, because you're not the only one doing it. There's hundreds of people trying to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. So with technology nowadays, I'll shoot it. I shoot pilots all the time. And,
you actually shoot the pilot yourself?
Yeah, I'll shoot a pilot, or obviously that costs money, so more cost effective, I might just shoot a sizzle reel for something. And that way, when you go in and pitch it, and you set up a meeting, and you go sit down, and you're sitting across the desk from the executive, and you're pitching it, and you're trying to paint that picture for them to see that world that you're trying to sell to them, and then they'll hopefully get it. And then at the end of that, you can say, and also, I have a sizzle, I have a 3-minute presentation of this world, especially if it's a world that's somewhat difficult, or you're trying to convince them to get into, and then you can pop it in, and they'll see it. And nowadays, with the internet, you mentioned Louis C.K., if you could go into a network or studio and say, yeah, this is my idea for my series, but by the way, I created a web series about it, and I'm getting 1 million hits. What do you think they're going to say? They're going to this guy already has a built-in audience already. So now they're going to, be a little more prone to trying to buy your idea, at least listen and say, well, this guy is already come in the door, because quite frankly, anybody can come in with just an idea. And unless you're, a person that's trying to rhymes who have 3 or 4 hit shows on television, or you're Steven Spielberg and you've been doing this and producing shows, or Ron Howard, or the many other producers out there, they're going to, they'll listen, but there's somebody coming right behind you, has a 2:30 appointment that's going to pitch something that may be similar, or so I think for me, and I can't speak for everyone else, for me, I think it's better that I can show them as well as tell them, and it has worked. For me so far, I've gotten opportunities from things that I've pitched or I've put on the web. I created a reality show, and I haven't done a lot of reality. I've done basically scripted, but there's so much reality shows on television. It's kind of like the old westerns. They're popular, and they kind of everything. I think it comes around and again. So I think the reality shows for now are here. No one knows how long they'll be here. I think they'll be here for quite some time, because they're so cost effective to make. But for me, I watch some reality. Some I like, some I don't like. But I came across a gentleman who owned an African American owned tattoo parlor here in Atlanta. And for me, there's LA Ink, Miami Ink, but I just haven't seen that from an African American perspective of a tattoo parlor. And it was this different world. You saw, it weren't African American artists, there were, Latino and Caucasian, but it was just a different world that I came across, and I was like, wow, this this is a potentially, I think it could be a reality show that we haven't seen on TV. And so I knew that if I went and just pitched it, hey, I'm going to do a reality show about a tattoo parlor that happened to have owned by some African American artists. I think that's interesting, and, but I think you needed to see that. So I went in for about 3 weeks, observed the clientele, the stories that came in there, and that's what it's really about, the stories that these people come in, and their sons or daughter are over in Afghanistan, so they get a tattoo of them on their shoulder, or their husband and wife, got divorced and they, got a tattoo or what have you, was it their child or whatever they wanted. But once I got those stories, I took a camera crew in and we shot a 3-minute sizzle reel, and so now I'm out pitching it. And so when you tell people, when my agent or myself gets on the phone and we're talking about it, and people are like, you reel them in with that pitch, and they're like, wow, that's a great idea, I like that. You're like, oh, but by the way, I have a sizzle reel, I can show you. Oh, really? Oh, yeah, I'll send it over like today. Let me see that.
Very cool.
That sets me apart.
Well, and there's kind of different schools of thought out there, and you've got literally like I don't know if you know Rob Thomas. He made Veronica Mars and Party Down. Party Down actually was shot on spec. He just went out and shot that thing and shopped a complete pilot around. And then you've got other people who say that there's a risk involved, that you're not going to be able to do it as well. You won't have the production values. What do you think about that? I think with comedy, there's perhaps a bit more, like it's maybe a little less dependent on the quality and it's more about the idea. But what do you think?
It's definitely a risk. And I don't want to paint the picture that I go out and, and I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and shoot a whole bunch of 30-minute and 60-minute, hours. I did shoot a 30-minute pilot, but I broke it up and put it on the web. It's called You Can Write, and got a lot of good reviews. Actually won Outstanding Comment at the Los Angeles Web Festival a couple of years ago. So, but yeah, so definitely some risk in it. But I'm not rich, so my risk is very minimal as far as cost-wise. So I'll shoot it, but primarily what I do is I'll shoot sizzle reels. I'll shoot a presentation of the pilot. Rarely will I go out and shoot the whole thing. I did shoot a pretty long version of a reality show about a comedy club behind the scenes a few years ago. But honestly, with technology nowadays, and this is my opinion, I don't think people are looking for you to come through the door with a $200,000 pilot. I really don't. I think if you come through the door with the material and HD cameras nowadays, it'll look just as good with the correct lighting as some of the stuff that's on television. So I don't think people are sitting there looking at it like, wow, this, I can't believe this guy did this. This sucks. Like, unless if it's audible, if you can hear it and it looks really good and you have good actors, that's all I want. I want people to take that picture across. And it is a risk. It is some risk. But to me, this whole business is a risk. It's a risk for me just to sit home and wait for my agent to call. I'd rather take a risk, and I'm a risk taker. And I think you have to be a risk taker. If I didn't get in my car and drive 2 days across country from Philadelphia to Los Angeles without knowing anyone, and never sold cars before, waited tables at Red Lobster. I never was a waiter, but I did all that knowing that the end of the means was that I wanted to be in the entertainment business, and I knew it was possible, but how possible and probable was it is how much I would put into it. So, for me, yeah, it's a risk, but it's a risk that I'm willing to take. And I think that if you look at history in this business, I can name dozens of people, especially independent filmmakers and actually friends of mine who actually went out and shot films and things that all of a sudden now Hollywood is interested in because they went out and did it, opposed to, hey, I got a script or I have an idea for a thing. No, I shot a movie and I did it independently, and guess what? We made $100,000 off of this movie that I shot for $2,000. Now Hollywood's like, wow, if he could do that, what could he do with $1 million budget?
Very, very cool. Well, and that leads a bit into my next question, which is, now you're working in Atlanta. You made that drive out to LA, and there's a prevailing wisdom out there that you gotta get to LA if you're going to break in. Do you and you were telling me before we started about how there's a lot going on in Atlanta, but do you think that people have to start in LA before they branch out to places like Atlanta, New York, etc.? or do you think that somebody could start in Atlanta and actually get into the business there?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it helps to be in LA. I mean, a lot of things are still produced in LA, but I believe it could happen anywhere, and it's been proof of that. One thing about living in LA, I was in LA for almost 20 years, so I did that. But being in LA is a lot of things produced there, as I mentioned. However, there are a lot of people there.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go to Los Angeles, you're one of a million people that's trying to be a director, a writer, an actor, and it's not easy. So I think in other parts of the country, there's less opportunity. But if there are opportunities there, then you dwindle your landscape is totally dwindled, because now you're one of hundreds or maybe thousands opposed to millions. To give you an example, Rainforest Films. They're based here in Atlanta, and Will Packer, Rob Hardy are two guys that are friends of mine. And those guys went out and shot an independent film, Trois, many years ago. That film, I think they made almost like $1 million off of it. And because of that, Hollywood jumped on board and was like, wow, look what these guys did out of Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And with a little or no money. I don't even think those guys went to film school.
Wow.
So, they just decided just to do it. Hollywood doesn't really want you until they think that they've discovered you, that you've done something. Truly, you look at everybody who kind of made it, their overnight successes have been like for 20 years. Like they've been doing it for 20 years. And all of a sudden, oh yeah, that guy's hilarious. He's the best comedian out. But, he's been doing stand-up comedy in clubs for 15 years. And same with actors and actresses. You've been auditioning for 10 years, and all of a sudden, you get in a movie, and now they're like, wow, this guy or this woman is getting an Oscar. But then you see on E! Entertainment, they'll go back and they'll say they've been in all these Blossom episodes and All in the Family from 1970s. So there's no overnight successes. Yeah, I think you can be successful in New York, in LA. I mean, Tyler Perry, this guy, he was a guy who changed the industry. He purposely didn't want to be part of LA. He just did everything independent, from his movies to his plays, and whether you like his material or not, that guy is one of the most successful independent producers and production company. His own studio now.
Wow.
All out of Atlanta, Georgia. So
very, very cool. Well, so we're getting toward the end of our time here. We always like to have breaking in tips,
okay.
And this could be anything. This could be what do you think are the biggest mistakes people make when they're trying to get in? It could be what are the things that you would advise people to do? What do you think if you were to give advice to somebody who says, I want to be a TV writer, I want to be in comedy or not in comedy, what would you say?
I have a few things to say, but primarily my first thing is, one, you have to write. And I know that seems kind of cliche, like, oh yeah, of course you need to write. But in this business, you really don't have a resume. I mean, you have credits, but they want to see the written word is on the page. So if you want to be a writer, you need to write. You need to have more than one script, more than one spec. You need to write a spec of a current popular series, because the people who are reading that, they know the middles of the world, and How I Met Your Mothers. They don't really watch, some other shows that are on smaller networks or cables, and they just don't. So you need to write, and you need to write, I would say, at least 3 minimum, because what's going to happen is, if you give someone in that script, you're fortunate enough to meet a neighbor or someone who works on a TV show like myself, and they're looking for a new writer, an intern, or they're just going to read you just to give you notes. If you give that to them and they say, you know what, it's not bad, it wasn't great, but it needed a little work. Do you have anything else? You don't want to say, nah, I don't, but I can get you something else, and another 2 months later, they're going to hire another intern. I mean, they're not, so you want to have at least 2 spec scripts of a current series, and I would say an original, because now people are really looking for, originals as well. And also, you can't take no for an answer. This is an industry where you have to network, because the people that you are friends with today, who are PAs and production assistants today on shows, are going to be the showrunners of tomorrow. So you can be network with people, stay in touch with people, be friendly with people, and when you get the opportunity to meet people, let them know what you want to do. You can't be shy. I know a lot of times writers, we are shy. You have to go up to people and say, hey, I'm LaMont Ferrell. How you doing? I'm a writer. I love what you do. I love your work. I would love to work with you at some point. I have a script. If you could read it, or if not, if you point me in the right direction, let people know, because a lot of times you just speak to somebody, you see somebody famous, and you're like, hey, how you doing? You shake their hand and walk away. That was your opportunity. When are you going to meet them again? Probably never in your life. And you never know where that could lead to.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also I would say, try to get on a set, a TV show, wherever you live. 9 times out of 10, at some point, there will be something shot in your town, whether it's a local production or someone's coming to your town to shoot a movie or a TV show. Try to get a job on that set as a PA or as a production assistant. Or if you can't, just try to get on a set. If you act like you belong, you'll belong.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have enough time to talk about when I moved to LA, how many times I just went on production sets and people speak to you. If you speak first, then they think you belong there. If you walk by, you get your head down, they're going to be like, hey, can I help you? If you walk up, you're like, hey, good morning. They're going to be like, hey, good morning. You just keep walking. You just want to I'm being that serious. You just want to get in the midst. Because once you're in, and once you meet someone, and once you talk to them, and you come across as a cool guy, as a good person, but on top of that, you have to have your homework done. So that goes back to the script. So you don't want to meet someone and then get to know them, and then finally they say, you know what? Hey, man, we have a freelance script. You have a script? And you're like, nah, I don't. So do your homework first. And I think, the sky's the limit.
Very, very cool. Well, that is a great place to end up. And can people find you on Twitter?
Unfortunately, I thought about that before we did this interview. I haven't started tweeting yet, but I'm on Facebook. You can find me on Facebook, LaMont Ferrell. You can email me. I don't mind giving my email out. It's Lamont at justjokesentertainment.com. And, you can reach out to me on email or on Facebook. And like I mentioned, I teach a sitcom writing class. So you can go to my Facebook webpage about my sitcom class. It's Sitcom 101 with Lamont Ferrell. And soon I'll be tweeting. I'll start tweeting.
Cool. Well, when you do, let me know and I'll get the word out.
All right. Sounds good.
Very cool. Well, Lamont, thank you so much for taking your time, and best of luck to you. And I hope that very soon we'll see Created by Lamont Ferrell on the airwaves.
Hey, I hope so too. That would be a great thing.
Very, very cool.
Then we can do another interview. Talk about that.
Yeah, sounds great.
All
okay,
right.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye. Hosted by Gray Jones, the TV Writer Podcast is brought to you by Script Magazine and ScriptMag.com, the leading source for script writing information in print and on the web.